Welcome! We're continuing the Scout series in this video. We've already looked at all of these other guns. Today we've got the Zhukovs. Now we're looking at them in isolation, and in a future video we're going to start comparing how these options work against each other. I ran two surveys to try and get some additional data for this video. One was for the general community, and one was for my normal high-level players which often push themselves on modded difficulties. Thank you if you completed one of the surveys, and keep an eye on my channel for when the next survey comes up. And we have a third source of data, and that has been provided from carl.gg, the website, and supplied by MeatShield. A big thank you to everyone involved in providing me with this data. Massive thank you to the high-level players who really help with my research. They're always pushing themselves into modded difficulties, and it gives great insight into the guns of Deep Rock Black. And finally, these are the mods used. A huge thank you to the creators of them. They make my life so much easier when making these videos. In my survey, I asked what you wanted covered, and by far the most common response was the fact that one shot consumes 2 ammo. And we can see this in this simulation. Each time we tap fire, 2 ammo is consumed. And up against this Praetorian, we can see it even clearer, 1 instance of damage, yet 2 ammo consumed. And this actually makes it so our in-game stats aren't quite accurate, and it's more likely that we've actually got 50% of these numbers. Which might be why another common theme was people in my survey saying the gun just felt like it didn't have enough ammo. Another thing that this impacts is our rate of fire. The base gun has a rate of fire of 30. If we pause after firing for 1 second, we can see we've almost fired those 30 shots. We fired 28. But the reality is we can divide that in 2, and it's actually only 14 hits. Just like with our ammo, with rate of fire, we can basically divide it in half. There were so many comments of people really not being happy about how this works and how the stats are represented. Someone did suggest to me, although I can't confirm it, that it could be a limitation for Unreal Engine 4 that Ghost Ship Games are trying to work around. Whatever the case, it is good to be aware of this if you are going to use the Zhukovs in-game. The second most common comment was about accuracy and how it just doesn't feel right when we fire the gun. Now we have a really wide and horizontal crosshair when it comes to the Zhukovs, whereas normally we're used to this smaller circle. Having that larger horizontal crosshair is difficult to adapt to, but I think the issue again is coming down to the fact that we've actually only got half of our ammo. When we examine where our bullets have hit, we can see we've got 2 real outliers here. They've gone completely wild on the horizontal axis. In orange we've got 3 which aren't quite ideal. Now if we had actually fired 50 shots and had 5 go a little bit wild, we could cope with that, but the reality is we fired 25 shots and 1/5 of our bullets have actually gone out of the crosshair, and this is why such a high percentage of players pick the reduced base spread so that they can be useful at medium ranges, especially against high value targets. Minimal magazines is one of our least picked overclocks. +1 rate of fire we know is quite weak because of the quirks, but we do get a significant reload reduction, which is great for our sustained damage. This was the most popular build from my survey, with people citing that they could deal with large targets like praetorians, but also high value targets such as our acid spitters, and still be good against a horde. We're also going to compare this build running simulations with blow through, and we're going to have a quick look at get in, get out at tier 5. The movement speed boost on this gear mod is pretty powerful at +50%. Keep in mind we do have that grappling hook though. A few people stated that the reload speed can keep get in, get out on 100% of the time, so let's put it to the test. One of the issues with this is that get in, get out does not stack or refresh the buff. We can empty our magazine when it only has a fraction of a second left, and then it will deactivate until we unload the next clip. This situation can be avoided by taking the extra magazine or just ensuring we pause for a moment between clips, but that can be difficult when we've got a big horde up in front of us. This speed boost is helpful, but we do have the grappling hook, and the majority of our players who actually took a build using minimal magazines used conductive bullets. That plus 30% extra damage against large targets and the horde with say an IFG is going to be really handy. Let's now look at our more traditional simulations with minimal magazines. We will be comparing blow through versus weak point damage, and this is also going to give us our first baseline to compare against our next overclocks. Up against 8 grunts, we can see that even with a blow through of only 1 additional target, our time to kill is going to be lower, and it's going to be a much lower ammo consumption. Against 8 grunts, we can see blow through comes out on top, but what about a mixed horde? Here we have 3 slashers and 3 guards, and we can see the real limiting factor here is the guard leg armor, which really causes us some issues here. It brings these 2 gear mods much closer together, but blow through still just about comes out on top. One thing that we really need to look at is this total percentage ammo consumed. That is a huge amount of our ammo just to take on 6 targets. Moving to high value targets now, and we've got this trijaw simulation which is just displaying the differences in the damage. Weak point having that +9 damage and being able to take the target down with 4 less ammo. With this simulation, we've got a much more normal angle and range on this trijaw. We can see there's a big difference between 10 damage when we don't hit a weak point or the higher number when we do. Running this simulation multiple times, I found it was more to do with your aim rather than the gear mod. Weak point does come out just ahead, but you can quite easily do 4 runs with the blow through and have better averages than the weak point. And this is quite similar when it comes to our acid spitter. Weak point does just about on average take it down quicker, but it's not much difference and it's more to do with the RNG. I also found in practical games when a swarm of mactera comes in, blow through can quite often hit multiple targets, especially if those targets are shooting one of your allies and you can move into a better position. From my testing and playing live games, I found the weak point bonus damage wasn't such a huge factor when it comes to high value targets, but does that story change when we go to our large single targets such as praetorians? Against our praetorian, weak point obviously comes out on top. It saves us an additional reload, which is why we've got that time to kill of 6 seconds versus 8 seconds, but the ammo difference isn't a huge amount. Blow through has consumed an extra 4% of our total ammo, but we must consider with it we can also kill targets behind the praetorian when we are shooting, which can mitigate somewhat that extra 4% consumed compared to weak point. The oppressor simulations are obviously just going to be larger numbers compared to the praetorian. Here we can see it's 3 reloads for both of these whether you use weak point or blow through, that's why the time to kill is similar, but the ammo consumed obviously is going to be more on blow through. Our final simulation is with an IFG. This is triggering conductive bullets on both sides, but obviously with weak point we're doubling down on that damage. It saves us 1 additional reload, which is why we've got a time to kill of 5 seconds compared to 6.5 with blow through. With our data regarding weak point versus blow through, we know the high value targets are marginal. This leaves us with the choice of do we want to be better against a horde or better against large single targets. A lot of this is going to be down to your playstyle and the group you play with. I personally feel blow through is going to be better, and at the end of the video we're going to look at a suggested scout gameplay which could give you some more insight on why. Moving on to custom casings now, and it's our lowest picked overclock. The plus magazine size is more traditionally used for dealing with the hordes. This is because it's not really going to compete with embedded detonators, which we'll have a look at later on. But also, even against minimal magazines, that extra magazine doesn't compete with a faster reload and faster rate of fire. This leaves us with this build, utilising that higher magazine to take on the hordes, but also deal with those high value targets if our primary is down. In our horde simulations now and against 8 grunts, we can see that minimal magazines with that faster reload speed and rate of fire takes down our targets quicker, and this is even with custom casings having that additional magazine size. And this trend is even more exacerbated when we go up against our mixed horde. And interestingly enough, when we get to the end of this, custom casings has actually used less ammo. That means we've hit more weak points or less armor, yet the time to kill is still quicker on minimal magazines. The extra magazine can be awesome when you just have those few additional targets to take down and you don't need to reload. You can either use born ready to reload them or born ready to reload your primary whilst you're using them. But more often than not, if you're not going to take one of the exotic overclocks which we're going to look at next, you're better off taking minimal magazines. Looking at gas recycling now, and this pick rate isn't going to reflect post Season 3. Season 3 we've got that significant armor break and it has really improved the overclock. This was our most popular build, and there was a pretty even split at tier 5, some people trying to mitigate the movement speed reduction that gas recycling gives you, others doubling down on that damage with say an IFG on the horde. There is a huge amount of confusion about how this weak point damage bonus works. Some people stating you still get a ×2 multiplier on say a headshot, others saying all you lose is the plus 15% weak point damage bonus on the base gun, and finally we have people saying you get nothing at all. So how does this actually work in practice? First up, we can see hollow point bullets with that plus 30% weak point damage makes no difference, both shots deal 12 damage. And in this test we can clearly see minimal magazines getting that ×2 mouth hit, whereas gas recycling even with a plus 6 damage is only dealing 15 damage on a mouth hit. These tests show that any of our weak point damage bonus is going to be completely gone. Doesn't matter whether we take hollow point bullets or not, we're not going to get a bonus for it. We are also going to be losing our weak point multiplier hits, so this is going to be your weak points on grunts and the horde, but also it's going to be felt most acutely when it comes to mactera, especially targets like trijaws that we want to take down quickly. We're potentially going to have to rely on our primary instead. It's worth noting that gas recycling with that additional damage on our 1x weak point multiplier targets such as praetorians and oppressors is going to deal more damage than minimal magazines, even with minimal magazines having that hollow point bullets. And against frozen targets we're still going to get that damage boost, you don't need to worry about that when it comes to gas recycling. 350% armor break definitely is significant, and we can see here against our guard we lose no DPS, all of our damage goes through the armor. The speed reduction is noticeable, especially when we compare it to the other overclocks. You do feel that little bit of extra pressure. This is why some people take get in, get out at tier 5 just to give themselves that little bit of a buffer. Personally, I prefer to take conductive bullets. The IFG mitigates that speed reduction from gas recycling, and also it helps us completely shred our targets, whilst saving us precious ammo which we're going to need if we're taking on the Horde with the Zhukovs. Moving on to our Horde simulations, and we've got 8 grunts here. Gas recycling with that +6 damage saves us ammo as we're taking down these grunts, and this is even without getting those weak point multipliers. And in our mixed Horde simulations, we can really see how good that armor break bonus is. Minimal magazines is really struggling with that armor, yet gas recycling, we're just absolutely shredding these targets. And we can see that in the time to kill, the ammo saved, and that total percentage. Gas recycling annihilates minimal magazines in this simulation and gives us a new baseline for when we test Cryo Minelets. We are taking a hit when it comes to trijaws, which is a high value target we want to focus. Against a Horde low, gas recycling with that inclusion of armor break is really quite powerful against a Horde. It's great for just picking off 1 or 2 stragglers, or even in a tunnel situation where you get a lot coming towards you, especially if you include an IFG into the mix. In a future video we're going to compare this with Boomstick, but I feel now with that armor break it might just have a chance to compete. Let's start to examine Cryo Minelets now, and in my survey a lot of people had some really good things to say about Cryo Minelets. Cryo Minelets had the biggest variation when it comes to any of our overclocks when it comes to the build. There was a pretty even split between increased magazine size and reload speed, although rate of fire also featured. A handful of people also took conductive bullets for that increased damage. Blow-through was selected in all 20 build submissions. This allows us to fire through our target and still freeze it. Without blow-through we have to fire at the ground in front of our targets, whereas with it, at the right angles we can fire through them, deal our DPS and still get the freeze effect. The Cryo Minelets are only going to activate if they hit terrain. This means we need to be careful with our blow-through, as really we can only hit one target, it needs to go through and then impact the terrain. And with blow-through we have the potential to permanently freeze a praetorian or an oppressor while still dealing our DPS. It takes a little bit of practice and skill to be able to do this, and these examples aren't great, but it does show that you can do it. The choice between freezing and then swapping weapons to your primary seem to help inform whether you take extra magazine size or reload speed. Swapping to your primary after unloading a larger magazine size and letting Born Ready reload, or if you want to quickly reload to keep firing the Zhukovs. And we can see this in this simulation. We don't quite freeze all the targets on the left hand side, but we do have that reload speed to keep that sustained damage going. Whereas on the right hand side we freeze more and then we just pull out the Drak to wipe them out. And interestingly, both of these philosophies had a similar time to kill, even though we've got high damage on that overtuned particle accelerator. With a smaller magazine we can still freeze the Praetorian in one clip, and with a larger magazine we still can't freeze an oppressor with one clip. I personally find the lower magazine is absolutely acceptable and prefer to have the utility of the extra reload speed, but your mileage may vary. Going into our simulations now, we can see Cryo Minelets comes out behind gas recycling, and that's on time to kill and total ammo consumed in this simulation up against 8 grunts. With our mixed Horde, I was really surprised to see Cryo Minelets come out with the exact same time to kill and a lower ammo consumption, especially since we have to dump our first magazine into the ground to get that freeze effect. Simulations in Sandbox is one thing, but when we come to a more realistic environment, we can see Cryo Minelets time to kill increases and that ammo consumption. Also, this actually took me 3 attempts to try and get this video clip where I had a half decent freeze, whereas gas recycling, this was the first recording I took and it's the one I used. Cryo Minelets can be really good at quickly freezing our choice targets and taking them down either with the primary or the Zhukovs themselves. Being able to cherry pick wardens in the middle of the pack can also be immensely helpful. Cryo Minelets can have quite a high skill ceiling and take quite a bit of concentration to use it well throughout a game. If we do use it well, it's a great hybrid option for dealing with the Horde and with larger targets. And it is the hybrid nature of Cryo Minelets that a lot of people enjoy, being able to freeze different types of targets and still do okay against the Horde, even if occasionally costing ourselves more ammo and potentially more time to do it. And to finish off Cryo Minelets, let's do our Praetorian simulation. It's up against gas recycling, which has been our best average performing overclock so far, and this is going to give us a good baseline for when we look at embedded detonators. Embedded detonators now, and this is by far the most popular overclock picked across all 3 of our metrics, and that's because this overclock can kick out a ton of damage. This was pretty much our most popular build, with the majority of players selecting that faster reload speed. We do have some people picking conductive bullets at tier 5, and we're going to examine how that impacts the overclock very shortly. Some basics first, and the overclock will display this symbol for a few seconds. This means when you actively reload you will kill the target, and we can also see there's no AoE effect, it's just a single target takes the damage. When the symbol gets applied, the target also gets a 90% speed debuff for 2 seconds. I never realised this until I read Split's intro survey response. The symbol will disappear after 2 seconds, but the bullets will still be in the target. As soon as you empty your clip, they will explode. You can also animation cancel to not have to reload the entire clip, so you can still get the explosion and then carry on shooting for the remaining amount you have. The damage is 38 per bullet, but that is impacted by Hazard 4 and Hazard 5 global resistances. The only way to increase this damage is with an IFG. Conductive bullets will only increase the base damage on that first hit. The internal damage is still going to be the same. Heavy armor, unbreakable armor, and the Glyph Dreadnought shell all completely stop embedded detonators. The bullets won't be able to penetrate into the target, and when you reload, nothing will happen. On the flip side, we can fire through normal armor, and the weak point is going to make no difference to the internal explosion. We can see both sides it's 380. Of course, hitting a weak point does increase our first hit, that's why we're seeing 13.8 compared to 4, but the internal explosion is going to be exactly the same. With the internal explosion being our primary source of damage, makes it so we can have better angles because we can fire through armor, not always needing to get to the weak point. Also, it can be a better situation to leave the weak point entirely, allowing other teammates with higher damage to focus those weak points. By using Born Ready, we can almost empty the magazine, but then not quite. We then let Born Ready reload. This way we can keep stacking those detonations inside the target, and then in one single reload, annihilate the target. This trick works on all of the Dreadnoughts and the Corelog event. Obviously it takes a long time for Born Ready to keep on reloading, but you can avoid those health gates. I thought I would just do our 8 grunt horde simulation because I wanted to show that blow through can go through multiple targets and you will get those embedded detonators on both. To be thorough and to complete the dataset, I did the mixed horde simulations. Obviously that almost 25% ammo consumed with that low ammo count that we have of embedded detonators just completely removes it from the board for any of our horde attempts. Large targets, and so far Cryo Minelets was our best performing against the Praetorian, but embedded detonators, at least on time to kill, wipes the floor with it. When it comes to our large single targets, embedded detonators is really only competing with embedded detonators. Here we can see reload speed is still going to be quicker than magazine increase. Up against an oppressor now, and that increased magazine size is literally just a fraction ahead of our reload speed. And if we throw an IFG into the mix, we can see reload speed just about takes that quickest place again. Personally, I prefer to use reload speed, but it's pretty marginal either way. Before we get to the summary, I just want to go over a quick use case for the Zhukovs, and that is because we've got 71% of people focus on large targets, primarily of course because we've got such a high embedded detonators pick rate. And yet a lot of the high level scouts I speak to don't actually take the Zhukovs. This is because the playstyle they use is to focus on high value targets, acid spitters and trijaws, and not to deal so much of those large single targets. My next video is going to be on this and you can look in the description for more details, but it is food for thought for why you are taking the Zhukovs in the first place. And whilst I have you here, I just want to say that these videos take such a long time to research and edit together. If you found anything helpful, I'd really appreciate you give the video a like and consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell if you want to be aware of the next video and my next survey. Summary time now, and with all the data, my research and playtime, I think it breaks down like this. Gas recycling with that new armor break heading up the horde clear, the true hybrid for Cryo Minelets being able to take on the horde and our large single targets, and of course there's no competition when it comes to our large single targets, it's embedded detonators. In second place for Horde Clear, I've got minimal magazines and Cryo Minelets. Cryo Minelets can be a little bit awkward to use, whereas minimal magazines you've got consistency. Hybrid, I've got gas recycling because it is still really good at taking on those large single targets with that increased damage. And then behind embedded detonators, we've got Cryo Minelets. That freeze effect can still take down our large single targets quickly. Coming into third place on our Horde Clear, we've got custom casings. The data tells us it's behind the other options. Minimal magazines comes in with our hybrid and our large single target clearance. Before season 3, I was really quite enjoying it in both of those roles, but gas recycling with that armor break now just comes ahead of it. Keep in mind that I've only run simulations on the popular builds. You might have a completely fantastic build which is different to what we've got here. Please share it in the comments so we can all learn together. A huge thank you to Little Bobby Tables and Vrin, plus everyone in the Gaming Existence Discord server, and your next video should be at the top right of the screen. I'll see you next time.